Hey everyone, Zephyr here. This is Shining Force Legacy of Great Intentions, the RPG Rush Edition. This series where the game goes by double time in the background and I fill in the blanks. Alright, so the game starts off with your main character, as you might expect, who is this unknown swordsman in training, which is not exactly a big deviation from the series. Though, I guess you'd say it probably set a standard for the series, since this is the first game and the rest of them follow after it. But we'll probably get into more of the cross-game similarities later. Anyway, trouble's brewing right off the bat, with the king summoning away your tutor, mentor, trainer, whatever you want to call him, Varios, the knight, which leaves you free to roam around for a little while, supposedly looking for clues, but kind of doing whatever you want to do. And I'm going to use the time to explain the upcoming events, which are all based on the backstory of this ancient evil that I believe they sealed away about 1,000 years ago, but which they've all pretty much forgotten about by this point. The only clue or remnant they have to this whole bit of history is the Gate of the Ancients, but they have no idea what's behind it anymore. Which is exactly where we come in. The Runefast army has appeared at the gate, and now we are sent out to check on it because they trust us for whatever reason and think we'd make a good leader. So they tell us to gather our troops, which is this little group that just kind of appears. We don't have to do any gathering of our own. And they send us off towards the gate, where a small group is intended to essentially sneak through to the gate and see what's going on and face the problems there. Because armies never seem to really be able to accomplish anything, if you notice. RPGs are always about the small groups that can do what the many cannot. And Shining Force is no exception to that. Now there you just saw another character, May, who later becomes a party member. You can tell that they're important by the face picture that you see. It means they're either a very important NPC, or most commonly a later member for your team. And that's a fact that you want to keep in mind while playing through this game. For people like him, that will not join you right off the bat, but you may have to come back and get them later. Sometimes much, much later. So we're on our way. The first time you leave the town, that cart automatically takes you over here to the Gate of Ancients, and you see this little cutscene where you see what's going on with Runefast army, and then combat begins. As you notice, I don't go into combat directly. I leave, go over to this little area, and get another party member, who's just standing there waiting for you. It's not vital that you grab him immediately before that first battle. You can get him afterwards when the next battle begins. But, you know, the sooner you get a character, the sooner you can start leveling them up. And level them up we shall, because leveling in this game is a very simple mechanic. You need 100 experience to level. Doesn't matter the what level you are, whether you're level 1 or level 99, you always need 100 experience. What does change is that the enemy gives a different amount of experience, between 1 and 48, I believe, depending on what level they are compared to you. They don't show their level, so it's just a matter of how strong they are and how much you've overleveled the battle. Though that's just the max experience that you can get out of each of these little bits of combat. You also get different amounts depending on how much damage you do, sort of, and mostly whether or not you kill them. You get a lot more if you kill them, and a lot less if you don't. You also get some experience for using items and for casting heal spells, but that's pretty much it. Like I said, very simple leveling mechanic. So I should probably point out the biggest difference between the combat in Shining Force and the combat in regular RPGs, though it's probably one of the first things you noticed, because Shining Force is kind of a hybrid strategy RPG. You have a battlefield, you move around it within your limits, and you attack enemies. You get one turn, one swing, enemies do the same, and that's just how all combat in the game goes. Now there's some finer details, like the land effect you see up in the top left. It decides how far you can move, or rather modifies how far your base movement stat can take you. And of course, because it's a movement grid, there are some attacks that can shoot multiple squares. There are some spells especially that can hit more than one square at a time. You really devastate the enemies with some of those. But beyond that, it is pretty much just an RPG. You've got your basic stats that determine your weapon damage, your magic damage, your hit points, your magic points, your defense, your speed, which affects the order that everybody takes their turn in, and your movement. Movement range doesn't really change unless you use special potions or equipment to raise it, otherwise it's pretty flat. And of course, since your stats do raise and it's not entirely gear based, you can always leave the battle, come back, fight everything again, and get more experience, as you will see me do here in just a minute. Since this Rune Knight is the last enemy on the map, and therefore if you kill him, you win the battle, it's over, you can't go back and do it ever again. What you won't see, because I edited it out, is how many times I went through this battle. I think I only did about 3 or 4, but it was enough to get the characters that I play the most, that I care the most about, up to reasonably powerful levels. Most importantly of them is giving the main character some strength, some defense so that he doesn't get killed, and giving my mage Blaze 2, which you will see used to great effect a couple times throughout the next battles. I mentioned the main character in particular because, as your main player, if he dies, the battle is over. You lose, period, end of discussion. And this will almost undoubtedly be the way that you most often lose battles in this game. Otherwise, it's not that hard of a game. Especially since if you do die or are in danger of dying, all you have to do is go back through and do the battle again. Just like how you would grind out levels in any other classic RPG. However, the reverse of that is also often true. Not in every battle, but a lot of them have an enemy leader, a commander on the battlefield, that if you kill him, all the other enemies on the field immediately die. You unfortunately don't get any experience for any of the ones that are killed then though, so I usually avoid doing that because I prefer to kill stuff and get experience for it. Makes the upcoming battles easier and prevents you from having to repeat as much. I think that's pretty much it for the combat basics though. Then of course there's what you're up against, how smart the enemy is, and the overall AI. Now this is an older game, so I mean they don't try and pull any complicated tactics or maneuvers on you, but what they do know how to do is seriously take advantage of weakness. Which means if you have a character low on life, or a character with really low defense, it's in your best interest to either heal them, keep them out of the way, or in some other way protect them. The enemies also generally know how much damage they'll do to individual characters, so they know whether or not they'll kill them or just damage them, which affects their target choice, especially if your main character is involved. Because as I mentioned, if your main character dies, you lose the battle, and the enemy is aware of this, at least enough so that they will almost always go after your main character if they can. And there we have the end of the first battle. Runefaust is defeated, the Gate of Enchants is defended, and apparently their army swung around and attacked our city while we were busy here. Go figure. So now we start rushing home to try and save the day, but the road is blocked because of the earthquake, which forces us to go north through the worst possible terrain conditions, because all those brown hills scattered around reduce your movement horribly. And at the same time we're also funneled through that little passage there between the water and the mountains, which it just is not enough room for all your characters, so it takes forever to grind your way through there. But thankfully, the enemies don't try and block you in or clog up the path. They actually only retreat, not even trying to attack you at all until they get back to whatever designated position they're supposed to be in. Which you sadly can't take too much advantage of because you're too busy stumbling over hills trying to get to them. But this does leave you with a good example of how bad terrain can make a map very painful. Alright, I think there are only a few more interesting points to combat. You can miss enemies or be missed, you can do double attacks, which they can also do to you. Pretty much anything you can do, the enemy can also do. There are critical hits, which they call devastating attacks. I don't believe there are any counterattacks in this game. I remember that there are in later Shining Force, but not this one. And then there are status effects, though not very many. There's sleep, there's stun, both of which really do the same thing. They freeze you in place and make you skip your turns. And then there's poison, which deals damage to that character every time their turn comes up, regardless of what you do with that turn. Of those effects, sleep wears off after a certain number of turns. I don't think you can be knocked out of it. Paralyze, I think you have to use a healing item on. And poison, you also have to use a healing item on, an antidote. There are some spells later that have some beneficial or potentially harmful effects, but I will cover those as they are introduced into the game, which I don't believe will be for quite a while. And that pretty much takes care of combat, so I'll go back through and reintroduce the characters more thoroughly. You've got your main character, of course, whose default name is Max, and who we don't really know much about yet because he apparently has amnesia. We've got his best friend, Lo or Loey, who is a cleric or priest. We've got Teo or Tao, who is a mage, specializes in fire magic. There's Gong, the newest guy that I pick up, who's a monk who has some fighting capability and some healing. Then there's your warrior, Luke, or some translations have him as Lug. Your archer, Hans, and your knight, Ken. They don't really go into details on most of the characters, or at least the starter characters that don't really come from anywhere, they're just given to you. They do have connections to characters in other games, but as far as within this game's lore, there isn't really much of anything. And it looks like this battle is drawing to a close. As you can see, I blocked off the bridge, trying to funnel them where I want them to be, and I've got my archers, ranged characters set up across the river, and Teo just waiting to blast them to bits, which she does pretty successfully. Only leaves one of them behind, which is easy to take out. And she even gains a level out of it, though that isn't hard with a blast like that. Then Luke finishes up the rest of the battle, leaving the way back into Guardiana clear to us. And the bad guys, the Runefaust army, certainly did a number on this place while we were away. Trashed all of the buildings, there's not a whole lot of people left, but this is one of those cases where you can now pick up a party member that you saw earlier but could not yet recruit. It's not long after this time, and it's very straightforward, you just have to go talk to him, but it is very possible to miss him, as with every special character. Though special in this case may just mean not handed directly to you, as he's not one of the few secret characters that are stashed throughout the game. And I did glance through the shop, but there's not really much of anything useful at this point. And unfortunately there's no system in place to show you whether the weapons in the shop are better than what you have, you just have to test them out and guess. Here we are back at the castle to see the king though, who is apparently preoccupied. This very evil looking guy Kane is a general of the Runefaust army, and he has the Sword of Darkness, one of two very special swords, which he he just used to kill Varios and brush off May like she wasn't even worthy of his attention. Unfortunately, the king is also not in very good shape. He does manage to tell us more about the gate before he dies, though. He tells us to find a key and get into it so we can figure out what the heck Runefoss wants with it. And he encourages May to join us, so we have a new party member, which I'm not going to argue with. His daughter Anri that he mentions is somebody we'll run into later. She's another mage, but you'll see that when we get there. For now, we're off to Alteron apparently. But only after we finish looking around the city a little bit more. There was one chamber you might have seen in the beginning that I couldn't get into because of the soldier, and now I can, which means it's essentially time to raid the treasury. And here we run into one very lacking mechanic of inventory space. Each character can only hold 4 items, and if you pick up a 5th one, it doesn't even get passed off to another character, you just can't pick it up. So I had to sit here and trade between characters to finally pick up everything in the treasure room there. But that's it, we've made it to the end of the episode. To any that are curious, this was actually about 40 minutes of gameplay, all of which I hope you enjoyed for this first episode of Shining Force and first ever RPG Rush. So let me know what you thought of it, and I'll see you all next time. Take care!